Brett Lonsdale, and this time, if you've joined webinars with us before, I'm not alone. So we've got Sandy joining us as well from Lightning Tools, and we're going to do some introductions in just a moment. If you're maybe joining us for the first time and don't know who either of us are, you'll learn that in just a moment. First of all, I just want to welcome you all to the webinar this afternoon for us, maybe morning or evening for other people. But we're going to be talking about building solutions using SharePoint out of the box. In the past, or usually, we'll be providing demonstrations around a product release. We just happen to not have a product release this month. So we thought, well, let's go ahead and do something that is going to be useful to you anyway. We'll still hold our monthly webinar, and we'll show you some of the capabilities of using SharePoint out of the box, as well as other tools such as Power Apps and Power Automate as well. So just give you a quick background on Lightning Tools and a little bit of information about Sandy and I as well. So Lightning Tools is a company that I founded back in 2007. So it's been quite a while of building different products for Microsoft SharePoint, and that has of course evolved into Microsoft Teams nowadays as well. And everything we do is around Microsoft SharePoint and Teams, of course, primarily Microsoft 365, SharePoint Online and Teams Online. But as a company, we basically bridge some of the gaps that you typically find inside of those two products. And of course, every single piece of software has gaps in it. So we're a company that's been specializing in SharePoint and bridging gaps such as permissions management, content aggregation, also data integration as well, which is actually how we started off with Lightning Tools. And we've also got into things like form design as well. So we have a modern form design experience for SharePoint lists. So myself, I'm a Microsoft MVP, specializing in Microsoft 365 apps and services. And as I mentioned, I founded the company 17 years ago, and my role today is as the CEO, but also really as sort of evangelist of the company as well, involved in marketing, sales, and sometimes even tech support. Yeah, that's a bit about me. I'm going to just hand over to Sandy.
Hi, everybody. Hi, I'm Sandy Ussia. I've been with Lightning Tools since 2012. Started out in tech support, and still am helping to manage that function of Lightning Tools. My title is Technical Evangelist, so you may see me at conferences and spreading the good word around the world. I have been awarded Microsoft MVP 4 years for business applications, include specializing in Power Apps and Power Automate. So that's kind of my niche in the M365 world.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sandy. So as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about SharePoint solutions with the tools out of the box. So you could make a comparison to the sort of things that you could do with more powerful tools, but also achieve the same with more manual tools. So what we're going to be taking a look at using the out-of-the-box tools, we're going to be taking a look at, first of all, some of the sort of built-in solutions that you've got inside of SharePoint. Microsoft has made some great efforts here around site templates that are really sort of around different onboarding solutions, issue tracking solutions, expense tracking solutions, and things like that. And there's entire site templates as well as list templates that we're going to get into. So you can either use those inside of SharePoint, or you can also use them inside of Microsoft Lists as well, if it's a more sort of personal list that you're going to be building. We'll get into building some of those, but we'll also look at creating custom lists as well. So we're starting from the ground up, building a list. And one of the reasons is actually to sort of create the foundations for something we're going to be creating later on using Power Apps and Power Automate as well. And that is sort of filling a gap where quite often you need to have a sort of relational type experience between two different parts of a solution. So if we were building a relational database, for example, you may have a customer table, you may have an orders table, and we're going to really sort of help to design that using Power Apps and a couple of different SharePoint lists in order to be able to build a solution here in SharePoint. So you'll learn more as we go through that. And then finally, we're actually going to take the site that we've created and we're going to turn it into a site template of our own. So that's something that you could utilize time and time again throughout Microsoft SharePoint. So to begin with, let's.
Do we want to mention, if you have any questions, you could pop them in the Q&A.
Oh yeah, good point. Yep. So
yep.
Feel free to use the Q&A panel as we go through if there are any questions, and we'll also have a Q&A session at the end as well.
Do we want to turn our videos off at this point?
We do. Okay. Exactly. So yeah, what we're going to be exploring first of all, as I mentioned, is the site templates. So when we go in and create a new modern experience SharePoint site now, you'll notice again, once the site has been created, that given a few seconds, you're going to have a dialog pop up, and it's going to ask you if you want to apply any of the existing site templates that Microsoft offers to your predefined site. So we start off with effectively a team collaboration site. It has the default document libraries and web parts and so on that you have kind of always received when you create a new modern team site. But now we can also go through and apply other templates that will give you not just some additional lists, but they will also give you different web parts. They'll have example content and so on that you can work with, and you can simply go through and apply that. And you'll notice that on the dialog, there's actually two different tabs here. One is saying from Microsoft, and the other one is from your organization. And that's what we're going to get at the end of the webinar today, is to turn our creation throughout this webinar into our own site template. Okay, so let's have a look at that before we go any further. So I'm just going to bring up my SharePoint environment here, and we'll go in and create a brand new SharePoint site. So we're going to just hit Create Site, and we'll select the Team Site option, and we're just going to go through and give this a name. So I'm going to call this one the Employee Onboarding Solution. Okay, so you'll notice that group alias is available, and so because of course I'm creating a Microsoft 365 group here behind the scenes. We could add our members. There's no need for this. I'm just going to accept the default there of no members, and of course we get the modern team site as I expected almost straight away. Now, just after a few seconds, I didn't have to do anything here. It's given me the option to start designing my site. Of course, I could dismiss that and choose maybe later, or I can browse some of the existing templates. So in here, you'll see a fairly good selection of different templates that you can go through and apply. So things like training courses is actually very useful if you want to have a sort of team site to collaborate around a training course that maybe a group of people are going to be joining from your organization. That's a great one. There's also project management templates and things like that as well. An IT help desk is also useful and something I've explored in the past. What we're going to be taking a look at here is the employee onboarding. So as we go through and apply that, we'll just say use the template, and you'll notice here that it started to apply the template. So behind the scenes, it's going through and creating that content, and it creates that from effectively a JSON site script, and you'll be able to see the components of that as we go through. So we get the typical next steps, the sort of things that you would want to do: customizing the site, inviting your team members, maybe creating some news and changing the look and things like that, which of course you can do at any stage. That's just a sort of helpful guide towards getting you to create that. And there's also the option that appears in the bottom left hand corner. Again, you could do this at a later stage if you want to, but you can effectively teamify that site if you want to by clicking onto Add Microsoft Teams. So that will create the Microsoft Teams team, if you like, that represents this site with inside of Teams, so you'll be able to access the same documents, the same lists, etc., through that Teams app. So this is the site. There's some useful things on it. There's different lists. Well, there's a list which is called the onboarding checklist, which we'll be exploring in just a moment. And you'll also see some other bits and pieces like start learning, review resources, and they've got some custom action buttons in here. There's events as well. Different team members, so they're using different web parts to bring you some content around employee onboarding. But there's one slight challenge that I have with this, and we're going to take a look at that. I'm going to just simply jump into the site contents to show you that there's actually really just two lists that get generated with this site template. One of them is the events, which is showing those events up on the homepage of that site. So it may be events that are welcoming new employees to the organization and things like that. But we also have this employee onboarding checklist here as well. And as we go into that, when I hit new, you'll notice that we've got a series of different columns, such as the work that needs to be carried out, a description of that work, when it needs to be completed by, who it needs to be completed by, and is it complete, and when should it be complete, etc. There's no mention of the actual employee in here, which of course we could go through and add a new column for that information. But what you'll discover is really this employee onboarding solution is designed to have a site per new employee. So if we had somebody that had just joined the organization, we may, for example, have a order laptop as a item in here. So we'll have laptop required for work and add our description. We could have when it needs to be completed by, so we could say after 30 days. And of course, we could mark that complete and so on as well. And we can also do things like adding our mentors, providing any links, etc. And that goes through and creates that item. So really at this point, it's not much more than really a task list that's just assigning a bunch of tasks to different people to successfully onboard an employee. And another employee would require yet another site being created. And that, for me, generates quite a bit of overhead in making sure that this site template here is actually relevant to our organization. We want to customize it and then maybe save that out as our own site template that we can go through and apply when we're onboarding people. But there is an alternative to that. And that is that we could take this as the employee onboarding solution for all employees that we hire, and maybe modify the onboarding checklist so that we're actually associating that with each employee. But that's where I was going with the sort of one-to-many type relationship. We don't want to repeat some of the information like first name and last name and email address and things like that that represents each employee. So what we could do is actually have an employee list and then have the onboarding checklist as a sub-list to the employee list. So that way we just fill out the new employee information once, and then we can start adding the onboarding items to that form as well, which is what we're going to be able to accomplish using something like Power Apps. So that's just one example of the type of site that you can create using a template. And you'll notice the same sort of thing exists for lists as well. So when I hit new list, you'll also notice that there's different list templates, including the employee onboarding checklist that we just mentioned. So when we get into the list templates, again, they're sort of created in a similar way. They're created using list designs. And incidentally, the site templates used to be referred to as site designs. Prior to that, they were site templates. But site templates is the sort of new name, and they're generated using a site script. List designs are still created using something called a list design. So that's not quite updated yet. But you'll notice that we've got things like issue trackers, employee onboarding, event itinerary, and so on. And just hidden off of my screenshot there is also an expense tracker, which is what we're going to take a look at as well. So if we were to come down to that expense tracker, here it is, you'll notice that a similar sort of thing or a similar sort of challenge exists here. We can go through and add our expenses. So we've got things like the item, the date, the amount, the category that it falls into, a description and a receipt, but it's not actually applying this to an individual. If we had an expense solution for an organization, really we want to create an expense report, which is going to be maybe a monthly report, or maybe it's going to be after a work trip that we've been on, and we've basically generated a lot of expense items that are going to be associated with that expense report. So we want to do that all in one go, rather than actually just going through and listing all of these and adding things like the employee name to them. So another challenge with that is, of course, you're going to be able to see each other's expense items and so on. So this is ideal for maybe using with Microsoft lists. So you can go into your own lists, create a new list in there. So this list would then belong to you. So you're gathering all of your expenses, and that would make your expense submission easier when you come around to doing it. But if we wanted to build a solution for the organization, for anybody to be able to submit their expenses, then that would be more ideally customized by maybe using more than one list and combining them, which is what we're going to get into now. So I'm just going to create another new site. So let's go in and choose create site. It's going to be, again, based on the expense tracker or the team site. So we'll have our expense submission solution, we'll call it. And as we go through, we're going to go through and add some members in here. So, of course, for Sandy to do her thing, Sandy's going to need some permission. So we'll add Sandy and make Sandy an owner. And I'm also going to add a couple of other users as well who will be able to submit their expenses. So we'll have demo user 5 and demo user 6 in here as members. And we're actually going to get into some of the permissions as part of this as well. So we've got our brand new site. I'm not going to be concerned about a site design or site template at this moment. What we're going to do is just get into the lists. So we'll create a new expense tracker list, and we'll use that template. And we're going to just change the name of this to expense items, since this is going to become more of a sort of child list or a sub list of expense report. So as we create that, it will show up in the navigation, and you'll see what I mean when I hit new. We don't want to be sort of filling this out time and time again for each expense, and then somehow being able to associate that with an employee. So what we'll then do is just navigate back home, and we're going to go in and create another new list, but this time we're going to create that from the blank list template, since there's nothing else in there that's going to help me. So this is going to be my expense report. Okay, so we could complete this expense report, like I say, maybe monthly, or after a business trip, like a conference or something along those lines. So here we've got the title column, and what I'm going to do is just get into that column and rename it, since we can't remove the title column. It's got an important job to do as a hyperlink and so on. So we've got the title that we're going to give this is going to be expense reference. So we could actually generate an expense reference number or something that's unique to that expense report. So we've got that there. Of course, the underlying column name is still going to be title, but it's just going to be displayed as expense reference. And we're going to then use the new modern experience to go through and just create a handful of other columns. So we've got the person that's going to be making the claim. That's the piece that is missing from that expense tracker list template that will make it personal. So we're going to create a person column, and we're just going to call this the claimant. It's going to be a person or group column. And of course, we could have that default to the current user and things like that if we wanted to. So you'll notice some of those different options are showing up in here. But we'll just go through and create that. And we're going to have another person column as well, which is going to be our manager. And this comes in useful when we start to add some automation to the list, which we'll be doing later on. So when we send emails and so on, notifying our manager that we've created an expense claim, bringing that to them, they need to, of course, be aware of that. So we'll list the manager in there. We've then got a total claim. So if we are embedding a sub list on the form here, what we are going to want to do is to be able to aggregate up the expense items. And you'll notice in here I've got two different columns that I could use. I could use a currency column. It's going to default to US dollars in this particular site, or I could use a number column. And I'm actually going to go with the number column purely for the reason that the conditional formatting that you can apply inside a modern SharePoint list doesn't actually work out the box with a currency column. But when you go through and create a number column, notice how you can actually choose some data formatting on that as well. So let's just go through, just check I did create that as a number column. Let's double check that one. Yep, I did. Okay, so this is going to be total claim. It's going to be my my column there. We'll just give it a default value of 0. And we're going to add a few other columns so we can track this as well. So I'm going to have an expense report date, which of course you may have. And I'm just going to make Sandy's life a little bit easier by not having spaces, and so on. She won't have to worry about any %20s or anything like that in her calculations. So we've got the
and
expense
just to note, you can always then go back in and add the spaces for your users to see in the display name, but the
exactly.
internal name still will not have spaces. I always do that when I'm creating list columns too.
Yep, very good point. Excellent. So yeah, we're going to have a choice column as well, and this will help keep track of the state of the expense claim. So we're going to have a pending option. We're going to have an approved, and we're also going to have a rejected as well. Okay, so pending can stay blue, approved is green, and we could be a little bit meaner and make rejected red. And we can just have our default value showing as pending. We don't want that to be defaulting to approved, of course. And also to keep track, we're going to have who approved it. So that isn't necessarily going to be the manager. So we're just going to have an approved by. And finally, we'll have a approved date. I'm just going to refer to that as date, which again, I don't want a default value because we want to be able to populate that as we go through. I think just one more expense description, just in case that's required for any reason. There we go. So this is our custom list. And of course, when we hit new, we get the form straight away. It's just a single column modern experience. At the moment, I have to manually put in an expense reference. So we want to be able to build in some logic there where we actually calculate an expense reference number automatically. So Sandy's going to take care of that using some Power Apps. The claimant, we could have that default to the current user. At the moment, I get to select a user. I also get to select a manager. And we've got a total claim, which we want to make sure that that's calculated. It's going to calculate up from the sublist, which would be the expense items, which of course we can't do just yet. We've got the default value for the report date, and the rest of the fields here I'm just going to leave blank, and we'll save that. So notice how that's coming through. We've got our total claim here as 0, and what I'm going to do is just go through and actually create one more. So that was a 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll have a 1, 2, 3, 5. Where it's maybe me claiming. Demo user 5 is my manager. And let's just put in an amount here of 500. And we've got that added. So the reason for doing that is just to show you a little bit of some of the things that we can do with these lists out of the box, such as conditional formatting and so on as well. So you can see a bit of conditional formatting already applied to the choice column, but we may want to add a little bit more using either out of the box or some tools at our disposal as well. So we created our custom list. We've added our columns. Let's go in and configure the conditional formatting. So there's conditional formatting that we can do out of the box, or you can also create conditional formatting using JSON. And I'm actually going to introduce a third-party tool to you that is free. It's not created by Lightning Tools, but it is extremely useful when you're getting into conditional formatting. So back into my list here. To do some out-of-the-box formatting, you'll notice that on the total claim column, for instance, we could get into the formatting wherever it may be, format this column. And yeah, you'll notice in here I've got the conditional formatting, or I've also got data bars. So if I was to apply data bars, notice how we've got this bar for 500. If we actually went in and maybe edit that other item, we'll put in a value of 250 for this one. You'll see how this starts to scale. So we've got a visual representation of how much those expense claims are, which works well. And you can go in and edit that template. You can change the color palette and so on. So if you wanted to break away from your theme, you could do so. And you can also set the range as well. So the range may go up to like a 2000 or something, in which case we want to show a smaller bar based on that figure. So that's one thing we could do, or you could also get into format this column and do some conditional formatting here. So the default value is going to be gray, but what we could do is add a rule with some conditional formatting here showing it in red if we go over a certain amount. So if the total claim is greater than let's say 1000, then it's going to show up in red, and you can see that nothing is applying to that so far, unless we go in and edit an item and we exceed 1000, and we've then got that conditional formatting applying. So that's a great experience to do that sort of thing out of the box. And just to point out that if you go to format this column, there is the advanced mode, and that's where the JSON is showing. So if you wanted to do any sort of manual manipulation of that with JSON, you can do so in there and get it to do exactly what you want. And that's why I'm going to show you a useful tool from a Microsoft PMP community member who put a lot of work into formatting using something called the column formatter. And his name is Chris Kent. So you'll be able to Google Chris Kent column formatter, and you'll come across this little SPFX solution that's free for you to use. You can just simply deploy it either to your production or non-production tenant. It really won't matter, because you're just simply going to copy paste some of the actual JSON that it generates. So if I hit new here, you'll notice that I can choose the type of column that I'm working with, and I'm going to work with a person column. And if I'm working with a person column, it's giving me some different options of things that I can do with a person column. So I'm going to use this mail to action. So I'm going to select that and choose OK. And notice how it's given me a little bit of an email subject and body here. I'm going to change that to say new expenses.
I like the sample body.
Yeah, and the sample body is Dear Vesa. If anybody knows Vesa, you'll know the joke there. So I'm just going to put Dear Expense Payer. Please approve my expenses. Notice in here there's other parameters, like we can CC, BCC, set the title column to be included, and the type of icon that we want as well. So there's a list of different icons that we can pick and choose from. So I could maybe choose this one here, the mail forward icon, instead of just the little envelope. And it gives me a nice little preview of what this column is now going to look like, as well as the code. So all I need to do is select that code, copy the code, and then we can navigate back. Let's just republish our home page. Of course, we can get rid of this web part when we're done. But if we go back into our expense report, under the manager column here, we can get into the format this column, straight into the advanced mode, bypassing everything else, and paste in the JSON. And we can now save that, and we've got ourselves a little mail to icon.
Nice.
So if I click that for demo user 5, that's just opened up on my other screen. Just give me a moment here. And I'm just going to drag this up, and notice how we've got that addressed to my manager, in this case demo user 5, and the message that we put in. So we can now just send that and add to it whatever we want. So it's just a nice little way of getting that without having to add in any sort of Power Automate or anything along those lines. And yeah, there's other conditional formatting that you can also go through and apply. Using that, you'll notice again there's different number values. So you've got the data bars. You've also got trending, which will show you up and down based on the previous entry, and so on as well. So some really nice examples there of different sort of column formatting that you may want to apply. So I have one of the problem with the expense report. Let's just go back into that. You'll notice that I gave another user permissions to this site, of course. So I'm just going to copy the URL to this one, and we're going to jump in here as a different user. Let's just drop in that site. This is actually going in as demo user 5, and demo user 5 can see these two expense claims created by somebody else. So I'm just going to create one more expense claim as demo user 5. So we'll just have 1, 2, 3, 6. Okay. So we've populated that. We'll just put in a value in here, accept all the other defaults, and there's their expense item. But they can also see other items that other people created as well, because effectively they've got edit permissions to the entire site here. So what we're going to do is get into some list settings and security, so that you can actually only use your own items, or edit your own items. So as we go into the site, let's just reload to get all the items here as my site owner account. I'm going to get the list settings up, and inside the list settings, of course, you do have permissions for this list that apply to the entire list, but what we can actually do is just tweak the permissions using item level permissions by going into the advanced settings. And in there is anybody with read or above permissions, except for the site owner. We can choose whether they can read items that were created by other users, and likewise with who can edit. So I can say you can create items and edit the items that you created. So if we set it as such, choose OK. Again, as I go into the expense report as the site owner, I'm going to see everything. And I'll just do a reload on that just to show you again. But if I go in as demo user 5 and refresh this list, you'll notice that we are now only seeing that one item that I went through and created as that user. So now we've got that situation where you can only see your own expense claims. You're not going to see other people's expense claims as well. Okay, so that's kind of like the basis for the lists. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Sandy. So she's just going to switch to her screen and continue with some Power Apps and Power Automate in order to customize this solution further.
Thanks, Brett. Let me switch to my screen. You should see my slides now. Let me know if not. Well, it'll look the same. All right. Right. So we're going to look at first using Power Apps to just enhance that data entry experience. There are a couple different ways you can do this. One is through an actual choice to customize forms. So in case you aren't aware, a SharePoint custom list has 3 forms that are built into it in SharePoint. There's a new form, a display form, and an edit form. And those are called that. So there are ASPX pages for each of those forms, new form.aspx and so on. And so using this Power Apps customize forms that you'll see in the list in just a second, you can actually customize those forms so that from that point on, if somebody clicks on new in the list, then they'll see your custom form that you created. And you can do things like hiding certain fields or making them unavailable to type into and having defaults and things like that. Or you can also build a standalone Power App that is based on the list. And so we're going to take a look at that too and talk about why that's kind of my preference in this case. So we'll do a demo here. Going into let's see, I did not bring up the list the site that we've been working on just now. I'm just trying to think if I want to. Yeah, we have a site that has a bunch of items in there already, but I think I will go into our new site. If you could just remind me what that URL was, Brett. Sorry, that you created.
Yep, no problem. So let me just pop that in the chat. Probably the easiest. Oh, I can't. Sorry, it's so it's called Expense Submission Solution.
Okay.
Submission Solution.
Thank you. Maybe later. All right, so we've got our expense report list that we've been working on. And because I'm the owner, also an owner, I can see all of the items as even though that's got item level security on it. So one thing I could do is go to the command bar, to the overflow menu, and do integrate and Power Apps and customize forms. So I'm going to do that here for a second to show you what that looks like. but then we're going to switch to the other method. So what this does is it takes you into the Power Apps Canvas Designer. There are a couple different types of Power Apps, as you may be aware. There are Canvas apps, which is what this is going to be, and there are model-driven apps, which are mainly used with Dynamics 365. So what this has done for me is created a little app, and you can see it brought in 2 of the fields from the list. I could swear it used to bring all of them, but to begin with, but it brought in 2, and I can go through and add additional fields. So I could edit fields and add fields, and then it'll show you a bunch of the different, well, all of the different fields that are available in your list, like we had the expense report date and things like that. If I want to add some of those, I can do that. It adds them here, and I can say, you know, what kind of control. So a control means any of the kind of parts of the Power App, any like text boxes or drop downs, any of those things are called controls in Power Apps. I'm going to assume you guys have no knowledge of Power Apps at this point. And it gives you a form. You can see it says form screen, and it's SharePoint Form 1, and there's this SharePoint integration. So a couple problems I have with this method is, one, you have to kind of go in and really build the whole thing yourself. And I know that a lot of people find the whole thing where you've just got this one form pretty confusing, that the form has different modes, new, edit, and display mode, or view mode actually, and you can determine what different controls display based on the mode, but it's kind of tricky and kind of, I think, fraught with peril at some points where you're not really having it do what you want it to do. So what I would suggest, so when you're using this kind of form, you can also, I should say, another thing is that you get just this shape of form, and it would not be responsive. And as far as I know, it's still true that a customized form doesn't show up in the SharePoint mobile app. So if you're using that as your interaction with SharePoint, you wouldn't really be able to fill this form out in the mobile app. So yeah, as it is this way. So I'm going to go back to SharePoint. I'm not going to save that. And I'll show you another way. And that is to go to Power Apps itself from the app launcher. So I'm going to open that in a new tab. And if you haven't been here lately, or if you haven't at all, there's a fairly new user interface here, but I can say that I want to start with data. It's one of my options. I could have done a design too. And I want to use external data, and it gives you these little icons, like, for example, SharePoint or Excel or a database. So I'm going to use that one and use the default from SharePoint. And so there's my connection, and I want to use the SharePoint URL. Now, because that's a new site, it's probably not going to show up there. So I will grab the URL of just the site part of that. So sites/whatever, that's what you want to put here under SharePoint URL, connect to that. So there's my site. And then I want to select a list from that. And so I'm going to start this with the kind of master, the parent list, the actual expense report. So I'll select that and create my app. So it's going to go ahead and do its little robotic thing and create an app. And again, this is kind of a newer experience. If you had been in here before and maybe created the default 3-screen mobile apps, this is going to be different for you, but I like it because what it's going to build is an app that you can use on either the browser or a tablet or your phone. And it doesn't have 3 screens, it's got 1 screen. And with a lot of behind the scenes variables and things built in to make that whole thing easier, I think, as far as determining whether something is, whether it's in new mode or edit mode or whatnot. So I get this app that works as it is now. So if I click play in Power Apps to preview the app, I can see that it shows me these items that I've already, that Brett already entered in the expense report, and this too would be security trimmed. So if I am viewing this app as demo user 5, I would only see the ones that I had created as demo user 5. So as I select each one, I can see the information about that app and about that expense claim. And if I want to create a new one, then it changes the mode of this part so that you can enter new data instead of just viewing it. Then you can save it by clicking the check mark or cancel out of that and go back to the view mode. And in the view mode, you could click the pencil to edit that particular item, and that puts it all into edit mode. And I can see here in the play mode, I can view it in different form factors. So say I want to view it, like how would that look on a phone? And so I can see that I would have the details about the expense. And if I go back, and then I have the browse gallery, as they call it, to get to my different items and click here, and then it shows me the detail. So it's pretty neat on another device as well. So I'm going to switch back to canvas size and go back here. So I just want to talk a little bit about the parts of this form, because even if you've used Power Apps before in the past, the container concept might be new to you. And that's what gives it the whole ability to be responsive like that, to kind of move the parts of the app around depending on what size your screen is. So the app as built by Microsoft here, in this case, has a main screen container, and you can see that it's called a container, and it's oops, I didn't really mean to do that. It is it gives you information about that, and you can go to the documentation. It's a vertical container, meaning it covers this whole screen, and it has the different containers in it. So there's the top table name container, and which just has a label of the name of the list, and then the body container. Every time you click on one of these in this sort of tree view on the left, you can see that it highlights the part that you're looking at. And you can also see down in the at the bottom in the breadcrumb to select your different parts. So that's always very important when you're trying to change things. And so we can tell that the main bit of the business end, so to speak, of this app is in this part. So if I click here and then kind of go back up a level so that whole part is selected, I can see that's called Form 1. And that is a form type of control. So similar to what we just saw in the forms customization, this is a form, meaning that it's full of what they call data cards. So each field in the list corresponds to a card, and when you can do things easily when it's a form control rather than just on your screen, like saving items, and it understands then how to save that item into SharePoint. So it's a good starting point for sure. But there are a couple things that you would probably want to tweak on the one that you get by magic. For example, something like my status. When I'm creating a new expense claim, I don't really want to even see the status field. So a typical thing you might do is, when the form is in new mode, that I want to make something not visible. And so I'll just show you a couple of these typical things that you might want to do, and then you can go through them in more detail later. But in this pre-built form, there's a variable called new mode. So I can say that I just don't want that to be visible when I want it to be visible, I should say, when it's not in new mode. So I can put an exclamation point for not, and then if I start typing new mode, it'll come up here. And now I just happen to know that that's there, but I'm telling you so that you can use that in your own apps. That variable that Microsoft has added is super useful because I don't have to write whole if statements to say, if it's in design or display mode dot view or whatever it is. So, and also important to note, so just as a Power Apps tip, that you don't even have to put if statements at all. Oftentimes for something like visible, you're just saying something that can evaluate to true or false because it's a Boolean type property, and so it's looking for something true or false. That's why I don't have to say like if it's in new mode, or I should say if it's not. So that might be one thing you might want to do. Also, something like the status, we're going to be setting that in a flow, so we can say that we really never want anybody to add and to edit it within the Power App. So I can change the display mode. I can see by default the display mode of every card value, or every card is the parent, meaning the parent of the card is the form. And so whatever mode the form is in, that's the mode that this card is going to be in. But I might want to say that, I might want to modify that. It's grayed out right now because it's locked, but I can unlock it and say that if it is that in this case, I want it to always just be in view mode. So I can say rather than the parent display mode, that I want it to be in display mode dot, and then I get my choices that I have. So I just want it to always be in view mode. I never want somebody to modify that. So that might be also a tip, but you could make it, you only want it to be not modifiable in one of the other modes, for example. I can do things here like just removing things altogether, like in this parent one, I don't need the attachment. And so then I can just remove that all, and I can set things default values. So I'm going to actually skip ahead to another completed app because yeah, I'm running out of time. So, but you can set something's default value, especially when it's a new form, by unlocking that again and using an if statement here. So if it is in new mode, so here again we have that that variable that they've supplied. So I meant to say new. If it's in new mode, then I want to have some default value. So in the completed app, I have it calculating a way to get the expense ID. So I'll just say test here. And otherwise, so I put a comma here, otherwise go ahead and use the default. So that means that when I'm just viewing an existing item, then I can use the default. But I need to skip ahead a little bit, I see on my time. So what we want to do that Brett talked about was add a way to have the expense items on here. So this is going to be our main expense claims, but I also want to put the items. So a way to do that is to add the expense items as a data source. So if I want to add that, right now my data source is the expense claim list. So I'm going to use my SharePoint connection that exists and put that site URL again to connect to it and add in my expense items list as a data source as well. And so I could work on creating a whole UI to add those. But I think I like this UI too. So what I would suggest, or what I have done in my sample app, is to add a new screen, a blank screen that's going to be for the expense items. Then, and I'm just going to talk through this, I think, at this point, time-wise. I can go into Power Apps again, I should say, back into, going to open the canvas again. And what I can do is do what I just did, create an app from data, but do it on the expense items list. And so I'm not going to do that right now. But once I get that new app, then I can go into, so pretend this is the expense items one. I can go into its main screen, click on the screen container, which is really everything, and do a copy. and then copy it and paste it in onto the second screen that I added here in my main app. And then I will now have like a secondary app that does the expense items. Then I can add a gallery on the first one that displays the items related to that field. So you need to make sure that you've got a field that relates them to each other. So for example, we had our expense claims that had the title field that was like a number kind of a thing. And so in your expense items, you'd want to also make sure you have a field that can refer back to that, so that each expense item is going to get related to an expense claim. So we're going to actually look at the completed app once we have a Power Automate flow done. So I'm going to switch to doing that very quickly. There are a couple of things you can do with Power Automate in, just going to switch to my, sorry, lost my train of thought. Right, within a list. So there are some built-in reminders and sign off and rules, and then you can add automation to a new or selected item. So I'm going to do that. If I go back to my expense list here and I go to automate, I can see that there are some that are built in. So set a reminder, that'll pop up if you have any date field in your list, otherwise you won't see that. And then the rules are grayed out. That's what normally would let you add a trigger, like for example, if some particular field changes, then you want to do some action. And all of this uses Power Automate behind the scenes, but you don't really need to know that or know anything about that. But the reason it's grayed out here is because we have that item level permission set. And so you can't use rules in that case. And then the one other thing you can do automatically out of the box is if you have an item selected and you go to automate, then you get this request sign off as an option. And that sets up a pretty basic little sign off flow where you say who you want to sign it off on, and then it creates a status and determines who's signing it off. But if you want something more detailed, like an actual approval workflow, then you'll want to do that by creating a flow. So I can do that through the integrate and Power Automate and create a flow. And it brings up some templates by default, some of which are probably, I mean, those would be the most common things probably that you want to do. So I do want to start an approval when a new item is added. So I'll click on that. That's the easy button, easy way to make a Power Automate flow. So that brings up this screen where it looks for your connections. So this should automatically, you're signed into Power Automate because it's in the same browser. It should automatically show any connections that you already have. One thing I will note is if there was an approvals one and you hadn't ever used approvals before, it'll go ahead and connect you here on this screen, but you have to actually run a flow that has an approval in it once before it'll really work. So the first flow you run isn't going to work. I will tell you that right now, until you've actually kind of instantiated that connection by actually running something. So just FYI. When I continue that, it'll take me to the flow that Microsoft has built for me. And I can see that in the flow checker, there's a red dot, meaning something's missing. And I can see here the red message. And that is because Microsoft doesn't know who we want to assign that approval to. Everything else, it got the URL, it got the list because that's where we came from. And it filled in all of these things like the title of the item and so on. But we need to put who we're assigning it to. I could use the people picker to actually put a person, but more likely what I would want to do is assign it to whoever is put in the that claim as the manager. So I would click on Add Dynamic Content here. That brings up this dynamic content box, and who I want it to go to is whoever was put in as the manager. So I'll click on Manager Email. There are lots of other fields. These are things that came from the trigger, which is when a new item is created. That's called the trigger. That's what makes the flow happen. so I can click on that manager email. You can see more. There are lots of other fields, but Power Automate assumes that this is an email field and probably you want one of the email items, which is true. So I will put that in and that fills that in. So the other parts of this that is already pre-built for me, I do want to keep. It's going to, I'm going to expand that. It has a condition where, so what this is going to do is wait for an approval, and I will note that this template actually uses an outdated version of the approval, so you might want to switch it out with the more modern one that gives you more options. You can tell that because if you click on help, it says it's deprecated, but they haven't changed it in their template yet. Because now, yeah, it's a little bit different action that you have more information that you can provide and things like that. But this one does work. So in the condition, if the response is equal to approve, then it's going to send an email to the person who created the item and say that it's been approved, and otherwise it's been rejected. And then all this stuff over here is if it doesn't work in some way to get the to start that approval, like if the email doesn't work or something like that. This dotted line means that this is only going to happen in the case where the step above it has failed. So we'll not worry about that right now. But the other thing that you would want to add, and I apologize, I'm going to go over time here, is we want to update our list. So I'm just going to do that once real quick. And so we want to do a SharePoint update item. I can search for update item, because I know that's what it's called. But you could also click on SharePoint there and then see what all things are available for SharePoint. And update items, so then I do need to put my site address, which is the one that I am currently using. I probably will have to put that in again. Again, because it's new, it takes a little time for these to populate into all the Power Platform things. So I'm going to say that I want a custom value so that I can put in my own URL. Then it should still get me my list. So this is going to be, I want to update the item on the expense report list. And the ID is going to be the ID from the trigger. So that gives that as a suggestion there. And what I want to update is the status. I want to change that from pending to approved. And I would also want to change who it was approved by, which should be, I want to put a custom value and add dynamic content because I want it to get the approver that actually approved it. So in the approval, I can say the responder approver. It's the approver. It wants the claims. So I think I want to use this one. And I hadn't actually remembered that one before. And then the date, we want to use today's date, and I could put an expression in there, but I'm not going to take the time to do that. So then I would also want to do the same, a similar thing over here, update the item, but change it to rejected. And once you've done all that, then you can save your flow, and then that would trigger anytime somebody adds a new item. So, but I want to show that whole thing working just very briefly. So I'm going to go to my demo user 5, and in the site that we had before, not this new one, we have added the Power App here. So in order to do that, you would need to share the Power App to everyone in your organization if that's appropriate, and then get the link to it so that you can add it to a button on a page. So I'm going to open the expense claim app from here. And so this opens the one that had been finished on this other site. And so if I click on an item, it shows me the information about it, and I can say that I want to do a new expense claim item, or I can alternatively look at one of these other ones. I think I'll do that real quick to show the items, the expense items that existed there. So I'll do a new, which makes it 005 in this case. I can put in the description, and I'll check, I'll do demo user 5 in this case. And you could make that so that it defaults to, I'll make that go to me. And the total claim, again, I had disabled that, so I can't get that filled in. The expense report date, there is a default set for today for that. And then I also want to go in and do expense items. So it takes me to that other screen that I talked about adding before. And I can add something like the hotel and the date, and let's just put an amount. And we can add in those other things. I'm going to check that to save it and then go back to my main screen. And so I can see now I've got hotel as an item for this particular expense. And then when I save this, then if I go back out and look at my expense list, then I should be able to see that 005 that was created. And just as a little aside too, because we added some web parts to a SharePoint page so that you can see the list view, and then also you can click on it to see the details of that. So that's using connected web parts out of the box, SharePoint connected web parts. The list properties web part is that second one, so it'll show you items about that. And you can see, it takes on your formatting that you had set and things like that. So just one last thing to show, and I know I'm over time. Sorry, trying to find my cursor here. Honestly, where is it? Oh, sorry, I can't find my cursor on my other screen. Well, let's go with this then. So I should have received an approval request on that because there was a, except I didn't set up a flow on that list. That's right. But where I would see that I would get an approval in the Teams Approval Center or on my mobile app, if that's what I have set up for Power Automate. And then I, as the manager, can approve that. I would also get an email about it to show that that needs to be approved. So in any case, I should have gotten that. That takes a little time, I guess. Yeah. So I think that is, what I have to share. And I apologize for being over time, but there's lots to it. But yeah.
Fantastic. So thank you, Sandy. Just to wrap up as well, the final part, I think, to this is the ability to work with the site script. So once you've generated the site that you want to work with, if you've customized one of the out-of-the-box site templates, maybe created your own lists with the Power Apps and the Power Automate and so on, is to actually generate that as your own custom solution as well. So what you'll notice in here is there's the ability to generate a site script. Chat through Bing can actually help you with the generation of these, or you can actually export an existing site using PowerShell as well and generate the site script from that. And that's exactly what's going on here. So you'll notice that I've got some PowerShell that is using the get SPO site script from web. We're providing it with the URL to an existing site, and we're telling it what to include. So you can include things like the branding, themes. You can also include custom web parts if you want to. And what I'm including in here, along with those, is actually the expense report list and also the expense items list as well. We can give it a title, a description, etc., and save all of that to a variable which is called $extracted in my case. And once we've exported that site script, we get a ID for the script. And what I'm able to do then is just simply go through and deploy that as a site design. So notice that we're passing through again the title of the site design, the default web template, which is 68. That's for the team site template, along with the site script ID that was generated using the add SPO site script. So once we've got that information, so we can obtain that GUID from here. drop it into the Add SPO Site Design, you'll notice that you can then use the site design inside of SharePoint. So if I was to go in to SharePoint now, in fact, let's just take a little shortcut. I'll just jump into one of these existing sites here, and I can choose Apply Site Template. And as well as seeing the existing Microsoft site templates, you'll notice that from my organization, I can choose the Lightning Tools expense solution. And if we click onto the details of that, you'll see that it's creating a list called expense report, as well as all the columns that I generated as well, since we exported all of that out using the PowerShell. So I could just hit use template, and it will go through and basically generate those lists. You can see the applying site template is in progress, and within a moment or two, we'll actually have those lists created, albeit I already had them in that particular example. Yeah, once you've created your solution, effectively you can make it so you can use it time and time again, so we can end up with an expense solution site that could be used departmentally throughout your organization. So with that, I know, as Sandeep mentioned, we underestimated how long it would take to show you all of those things. We can, of course, take on some questions.
Yep.
If you don't have time now, feel free to get in touch via email. So there's my email address, Sandy's email address, and we've also got the sales and the support email addresses on there as well. So feel free to reach out to us and ask any questions if you have them. You can as well use the Q&A tab here inside of Teams if you wish.
I saw a couple people were looking for a link to Chris's little column formatter app, so I've dropped that into the Q&A.
Ah, fantastic. Wonderful. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share more about the app or the flow too, since I didn't really get a chance to get into all of the details on that, like how you generate the claim ID and things like that.
Perfect. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I guess, yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us, and hopefully you found this very useful. If there is any questions, or if you want to see in detail how to do anything that we went through, feel free to reach out, and we'll be more than happy to help you as well.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.